Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, April 25th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 131 days. The game against Michigan, 215 days. This is always a fun time of year because we are out of the day-to-day routine of the season of spring ball and can get into a little more creative area with show topics and discuss some of the things that you might want to talk about that we don't necessarily have time to do during a busier time of year. One great way for us to do that is to just ask you guys what you want to talk about and then answer those questions. So that's what we're going to do today. My guest is Tony Gerdeman. He and I host the Buckeye Weekly podcast together, and we're doing a bunch of listener question shows there right now, and we're going to answer some of your questions on today's show as well. So Tony, thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me to do the show with you, Tom. It is a privilege and an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
A rare treat to get to do a podcast together. Here we are. Let's savor the moment together. First question from @DJK24129. I was a freshman in 2002 and graduated in 2006. I took my time with the 4.5-year plan. I certainly couldn't relate to that with two major switches, so we'll just keep moving on. Not a bad time to have a student season ticket. Was that the best ever stretch of time to be a student attending games? So 2002 to 2006, you started with a Ohio State National Championship season, 14-0 season. They were undefeated at home in 2003. 2004 had, not a great season, but ended with the Ted Ginn punt return game against Michigan. 2005, pretty darn good season. They won all their games at home. 2006, everything went great right up until his time as a student at Ohio State ended with the 42-39 2-1 win over Michigan. That was, as far as I recall, the last game of the season that year for Ohio State. So that was a pretty good time. But Tony, you and I both went to Ohio State back in the 90s. There was some pretty good football then as well. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm very particular to my time, of course, as we all are. I was 94 through 98, also the major switch, and not just didn't extend school just to get 98 season tickets, but sort of. You knew 1998 was going to be the year they won a national championship, so you wanted to be there for that. But what I think is, yes, the student season ticket, and we should just let the people know how much they cost when we were in school. My first student season ticket was $55, not per game. It was like the season ticket. I think they were $11 per game, and there were 5 games that year that were on a season ticket, because then you had to buy the early season separately, I believe, back then. But I don't necessarily. 94 was the first Michigan win in a while, so that was a strong season ticket. 95 was Notre Dame; they were in town, so that was a strong season ticket. And of course, 95, 96, 97, 98, there were national title hopes all in there. 96, the start with Rice and Pittsburgh was pretty fun. I'll say that. Overall, though, like the success that you have during that time, starting out in 2002 and just winning a national championship and having all of those close games, I'd say you get spoiled by success, but each of those games are like a season in itself, like a difficult season in itself. So I can't be like, oh, that guy is just spoiled. The 2002, if that's your first season, you're spoiled, because there's nothing spoiled about that season's like, I don't think you ever felt like you were the beneficiary of it. You were forced to endure it. That's how that season went. And they did have some, because I feel like if you want to say you had the best stretch of seasons, there needs to be some heartbreak, some pain, and some just arc of a story. Now, this is kind of an odd story. Whereas 94, you had, what were they, 7-5, 8-4, something like that, and they weren't great.
9-4 that year. They lost at home to Illinois. Mm-hmm. They got murdered on the road at Penn State. Mm-hmm. They lost on the road at Washington that year, I think. They lost 4 games that year. Yeah.
But like, you have this, you get better. There's this rise, and the 2002 to 2006 stretch, it was a different rise. It was a hill and then a valley, but then you came back, and 2005 was a fun season, 2006 as well. So best stretch ever. I'm sure the Archie Griffin-ites, those guys are going to have some statements there, because for a 5-year stretch, they were They reached number 1 or number 2 nationally. Now they didn't win any national championships, so that's kind of an issue. I don't know where like today's players. Well, first of all, the 2020 season ticket didn't actually exist, so that kind of negates some people there. But for the Urban Meyer era, you arrive whenever you get your national championship, but really the 2012 season would be the only time where, in 2011, like where you have this growth period of where there's struggle and there's drama. Like if your first season was 2015 or 2014 and you said 2015, 16, 17, 18, you want to talk about it. To me, that one falls short, even with the national championship.
Yeah, I think the 2011 to 2014 arc is an interesting one because you have the not great 2011 season, which did still have that Wisconsin game on it, and then they go undefeated in 2012, and then go undefeated at home in 2013, and then win the national championship in 2014. That was not a great home regular season in 2014, but it ended up pretty well. So I think there's an argument for that. The Archie Griffin years, as you mentioned, definitely an argument for that. The other one that's kind of sneaky, if you want to do the sort of narrative arc, is if you were in the same class as the Super Softs in the late 60s, you have 1967 was a terrible year. That was one of the weirdest years in Big Ten history. I think Indiana and Minnesota split the Big Ten championship that year because sure, why not? And then second year, undefeated Super Softs, national championship. Then your junior year, they're undefeated and number 1 all the way through, and the Michigan game was on the road that year. Look at that. Oh, we're out of time. How'd that go? Well, okay, let's move on. But then, your senior year, they go through the senior year, they get the big revenge win against Michigan at the end of that year. And again, how'd the bowl game go that year? Oh boy, look, we're out of time again. So, but, I think there's an argument for those years. The first couple of years of the Urban Meyer era, I was in school in the late 90s, so I started with 96. My first 2 home games were Rice and Pitt, and they won 142-7, so that was quite a way to start my time as an Ohio State student. But then I was also on the 4.5-year plan, and 96 and 97 and 98 were all pretty fun for the most part, and then 99 was not great, and then 2000 was also not great, and then there was a new head coach. So that was, I think, there's an argument for the late 60s, early 70s. There's an argument for the Archie Griffin era. There's an argument for the time period that you were in college. There's an argument for the time period that DJK was in college, and kind of the early Urban Meyer era as well. So yeah, a lot of turns out there has been a bunch of good times to be an Ohio State football fan. Strange how being a fan of one of the most consistent and excellent teams in the entire nation has worked out over the years in a way that, there haven't been that many really bad times outside of like the late 80s, early 90s. There has really not been a consistent down period for Ohio State football. So there's a lot of good times and not that many bad times.
Let me ask you, Tom, how about this valley, this peak and valley? 98 is your first year, and 2002 is your graduating year, where you're at the top of the mountain in 98, and you have the best team in the nation. You are going to win a national championship. Michigan State happens, Clint Sterner happens, and now you've just got you're in this valley of the end of 98, the 99 season, 2000, new coach, 2001 you beat Michigan, 2002 it caps with the national championship. Like that is narratively, dramatically, that's kind of more of that might be the most Hollywood story.
That is a Cedar Point kind of career where it's you start at the very top, and then your sophomore and junior years you have your arms up screaming, plummeting straight downhill, and then you kind of hit the bottom. And 2001 was not a very fun season if you really go back and look at it. Like that was not a super fun time to be an Ohio State football fan either. But then they end with the win. All anyone remembers from that year is the win against Michigan. Mm-hmm. But oh boy, there was some bad football earlier in that year. But then 2002, that's a really interesting one. In terms of consistently enjoying the product, no. In terms of the narrative arc of it, like yes, that's like a sports movie. That 5-year stretch. So yeah, That's a good and interesting answer as well.
That's Tin Cup where he finally makes the long shot to qualify for next year's U.S. Open or whatever.
Yeah, the 99 through 2001 Ohio State football teams were putting a lot of golf balls in the water. Yes. No question about that. Next one from @RamyMara. Curious why the TV camera angle at the shoe is so far and high where we can hardly see the players. Contrast that with stadiums at Wisconsin, Auburn, Georgia, and even the Rose Bowl. Anything can be done to get the camera closer and lower. You want me to? I'll as the
You're
TV
the camera
guy.
Yeah,
I was going to say I feel like I should answer this one as the TV guy. So the issue is where the camera deck is at Ohio Stadium. The camera deck is directly under the press box. The press box is also basically on the dark side of the moon. Like it is way up there, just because of how they built it. They built it on top of the stadium, and it is a very tall stadium. The press box is always kind of high, but Ohio Stadium's press box is particularly high. A lot of times they'll have camera platforms a little lower. They could put a camera platform at the front row of D-Deck, for example, but, so that would be a little bit lower, but then you're taking out some pretty good seats, the front row of C-Deck. You're taking out some pretty good seats. You're blocking a bunch of pretty good seats, so they didn't want to do that. So, yeah, that is just a function of where the camera deck is at Ohio Stadium. It is very, very high. That was, they don't always, in terms of building sports venues, the press box seats and the camera deck seats are not always the highest priority. I had an interaction with Jeff Swoboda, who is the @Jackets Insider on Twitter last week, where he tweeted a picture from the press box at the San Jose Sharks arena, and you can see like the arena girders below the press box. Like you were so high up, and he said essentially they kind of like it was just sort of like an afterthought where they put the press box there. Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, the former home of the Red Wings, they literally forgot to build a press box and then went, oh crap, and kind of like threw one in. They essentially just like took out like 2 rows of seats in one of the upper corners and put 2 rows of press box that was just plain old cinder block. It was about the most basic utilitarian thing you could possibly imagine. So yeah, it is just, not the most, it is not the highest priority in terms of where that camera deck goes. And so that is why that camera angle is so high. It does lead to a kind of weird broadcast vibe. Like a lot of times you'll see, I don't know why, and some of it is camera, the types of cameras that people are using. Like last year, the Pac-12 had complaints about the Pac-12 network had just bad cameras. Like just not good, not modern cameras where it just looked like there was like Vaseline smeared on the lenses on some of the broadcasts for the Pac-12. So like TV cameras will have an impact. Lighting will have a weird impact on TV and what the product looks like. Like Oklahoma for years had like weird, just different color temperature lights at Oklahoma's stadium. So the games always just looked a little weird when you watched the night game at Oklahoma. But the camera deck angle will have an impact on that as well.
Yeah, watching the spring game, it was pretty noticeable from watching it on television. It's just, I remember thinking that you just feel far away. Even maybe it's because when it's a regular season game, I don't feel as far away watching it on television because the game is more in your face. Like the crowd is louder and it feels all closer. But it's like the baseball stadiums where they forget to put in a bullpen. You've got stuff like that. But, I can't fault the people for not putting in a camera deck when the stadium predates television by, roughly 6-7 years in its infancy. And the first predated the first televised college football game by 17 years. So, I guess we can give them a pass. But, yeah, you wish it could be a more intimate affair if you can be intimate with 100,000 people and screaming and whatnot, which of course of course you can.
And one of the things that makes Ohio Stadium a much louder venue than Michigan Stadium is one of the reasons the camera angle at Ohio Stadium is so much higher than the camera angle at Michigan Stadium. Michigan Stadium and the Rose Bowl, which he named in this example, are bowl-shaped stadiums, so they do not go straight up. They are very spread out, which means the press box is lower. It might be a little further from the field, but with camera technology, that's not really a big issue. You just zoom in a little more. But, the fact that it is very spread out means the noise has a lot of way to go up and can just kind of like dissipate. Whereas Ohio Stadium is much more straight up and down, which means the noise stays in a lot more. And so from an audio level, noise level perspective, that's great. From a camera angle perspective, it's not great. So in addition to the fact that they weren't thinking about TV camera angles at all when they built it, and you're dealing with certain parameters once you're, messing with a current stadium, especially a historic stadium like Ohio Stadium, where you're not going to completely change everything. That's sort of where that all comes in. So, if it was more spread out, you would enjoy the camera angle, but it would be quieter, and so you wouldn't enjoy that. So it's just kind of like you're dealing with what you're dealing with, and unless you're building a stadium from scratch, you're not going to have everything perfect at all times. Let's do one more from @BCSBuck. Is the new turf in the shoe? How is it different from the old turf? Same brand, same type?
Yeah, it's going in. I don't know that it's going in yet, but between now and June is when Ohio Stadium's turf is going to be replaced, including the Woody Hayes Athletic Center indoor turf is going to be replaced. Going to be the exact same in both places, and it's the same kind of field turf that needs to be replaced every 8 years. The design was released a few months back, and Tom, I am not the most perceptive person in terms of design. So when they showed the changes, and Ohio State released like a video of this is what it used to look like, this is what it's going to look like, and most of the time when I'm watching that, it's like, but you didn't change anything. Like the lettering in the end zone is going from what it is now to block lettering, so you'll have like block O and block lettering, and I wouldn't have known because I'm not as perceptive as a lot of people who live for this type of stuff, but they're going to have block lettering. There's going to be the helmet stripes at the middle of the back of the end zones. That'll be a new thing. Gray stripe all around the field and some gray stripes around the lettering. Like the average fan, I think, would walk into a game, walk into the spring game and then walk into the Notre Dame game and not have any idea that anything had changed other than maybe the turf looks newer or nicer, or you've got the darker shades and the lighter shades every 5 or 10 yards or whatever, where it might look new, but you wouldn't notice necessarily any paint changes unless you were really into that sort of thing. Right.
And yeah, it's going to look different, and your brain might say this looks different, and then if you were trying to sit down and like really think about what, if you hadn't like made a point to look at what the old turf design looked like and what the new turf design looked like, it would be like, this looks different. And if you said how, it would be like, in some ways it looks different. It's not, this was not going to be like, they were not going to do something really radical like the Eastern Washington blood red field. They just weren't ever going to do something crazy like that. This was a little more, there are some changes, there's some tweaks. It's fairly subtle. I don't mind any of them. But yeah, they are not. The lacrosse team is still playing their season. They play their home games inside Ohio Stadium, so that's still going on. They'll do that. I'm going to guess they'll do that at the conclusion of the lacrosse season, or perhaps after the spring commencement, because I believe that they said the changeover process was going to take like a month, 6 weeks, something like that. So, probably after spring commencement, which is in May 10th, something like that. I would guess sometime, like May and June will be when they do that stadium changeover, and then it'll be ready for, ready long before the spring or the fall season starts. So I'm guessing I'll swing over there at some point and do an update on that at some point when it's actually happening. But nothing to report yet, because they're still playing lacrosse, and then they'll still want to do the commencement inside the stadium in May. So that's just 3 of your questions. We got, I think, about 57,000 questions from you guys. So we're going to be doing a bunch of listener question shows later on this week on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. We did one last Friday. You can check that one out. We'll be doing many, many more this week because, again, this is like, we do these podcasts for you. We're not doing this just to hear ourselves talk. So we want to know what you guys want to hear about. So, tweet at us. He's at Tony Gerdeman. I'm at Tom Orr. Let us know what your questions are. Ask us on the Ask the Insiders board, whatever you want to do. We are here to answer the questions and talk about the stuff you want us to talk about. So that's what we're doing. So we appreciate Appreciate your input, so we're giving you what you want. And that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.